from Gaza upward ruled the coast. That's point one. Point two, that the land of Edom and Moab is actually the actual territory of what we would say the Palestinian state. In other words, the Palestinian state, and I know I'll probably get letters on this if people disagree.
Oh, yes, you will.
But the Palestinian state is actually supposed to be where Edom, Moab, and Ammon is, which is the country of Jordan. That is actually, and really the plan of God was for them to coexist with their brother, the Jews, and to get along with one another. But the animosity that goes back to, I guess we could say, Abraham, is still in that DNA, and even the prophecies that were given to Esau about he would be a rugged man, and Ishmael would be a wild man. His hand would be against every man. So that DNA is there to be kind of like warlike and struggling. However, let me say this, that in the country of Israel, there are many Palestinian people who simply want to work a job, raise their children, raise their family. Those are the ones we know. Run a business, and they'll get along with anyone just for the sake of having a good family. There is, however, Hamas and Hezbollah, which is the military wing of those organizations, two different organizations, but the military wing, who have actually called for the destruction of Israel, which is exactly what the prophet Ezekiel, this is what you're saying, they're taking up with the lips of talkers. They say, these two nations will be ours. And basically what they're saying is, sure, we'll make a peace treaty with you, then when we get the land, we're going to shove you, we're going to get another piece. We're going to get the rest of it.
That's right.
Is it going to work, though, Bill, according to prophecy?
It's not going to work, because there's coming a time, if I can paraphrase what the Creator says through Ezekiel, is I'm going to deal with this situation. Because politicians can't deal with it, because it's not a political issue.
Right.
It is a spiritual issue that goes all the way back, at the very least, to Genesis 25, when Rebecca is pregnant and she has two nations growing in her womb.
And it says two nations.
Two nations growing in her womb, and they're going
Right.
to be separated from your bowels. And so what we see then is this enmity between Esau, who is Edom, and between Jacob, who is the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. And it boils down to this, Perry, is that Esau feels that Jacob, or Israel, has stolen what rightfully belongs to him. But the problem is that it was never his to begin with. It was given to Jacob. It was given to the 12 sons of Israel. There was land that was given to Esau, but it's just not the land that Esau is wanting to possess.
Don't you think it's almost a situation where Esau, the man, has been long dead, but the descendants are trying to get the birthright and the blessing back, which
they feel belongs to them.
Right.
Well, let me just quickly go through this. Who was it that was trying to destroy God's people in Persia in the book of Esther? It was Haman, who was not a Persian. He was an Agagite, which means he is of the kingly line of Amalek. And Amalek is a descendant of Esau. So who is it that's trying to destroy God's people in Persia in the book of Esther? A descendant of Esau. Who is it that was trying to destroy the king of Israel when he was born in Bethlehem? It was Herod the Great, who was not a Jew, who was not a Roman. He was an Edomaean, an Edomite. He was from Esau. And so what we have, and people really need to understand this, Perry, is that...
They make it political, don't they? Everything's politics.
Supposed to be political, but it's not. It's a spiritual issue.
I've often said if you'd get the politicians out of the way and let the common Jew businessman, Jewish businessman, Jewish Palestinians sit down at a table, they could probably get more done than the politicians could, because they don't understand. Politicians are so politically correct, they will not make it a spiritual issue because they don't want to offend anybody. But it's an issue of two different ideologies, two different religious beliefs, as well as the history, the DNA that's in the individuals that creates this conflict. And what amazes me, Bill, is Ezekiel, the prophet who, 2,500 years ago, lived during the time of the Babylonian captivity and prophesied. He sees in chapter 35, and you all need to read the whole chapter sometime, chapter 35, chapter 36, chapter 37. And what's interesting is when he sees in chapter 37 that boneyard shaking, and all of a sudden Israel coming back to the land, becoming one nation, it goes immediately then into this major war with the what are now Islamic nations mentioned, and it mentions them here. You've got Gog, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, you've got Persia, which is Iran, Ethiopia, which is northern Africa. By the way, in that day it would also include the Sudan, not just Ethiopia, it would include that whole northern horn. Libya, and of course Gomer, Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands. Now Togarmah can actually be identified as parts of the edge of Armenia and Turkey, and when the Ottoman Turkish Empire had control from 1517 to 1917 of that part of the world, there were 5 southern Russian states that were part of the Ottoman Empire that are Islamic today. And so it's no doubt in my mind that when it says Togarmah of the North Quarters and all of his bands and many people, those 5 southern Russian states are going to come in on this coalition as well.
Which says this to me. Again, that a lot of people would look at that as in flesh and blood terms and seeing this as a political alliance, if you will. But it's not. It is a spiritual alliance, because if the war against Edom, which is described in Ezekiel 35 and 36, is what sets the stage for what happens in Ezekiel 37 and the big war in Ezekiel 38 and 9, then consider this. Then those nations in Ezekiel 38 and 9 are responding, if you will, perhaps, to the destruction of Edom and all these surrounding areas in a war with Israel. When Esau lost the blessing, you remember Jacob obtained the blessing, which was his actually from God's point of view, but nonetheless, when Esau realizes that Jacob has the birthright and the blessing, here's what he did. He already had 2 wives, but he took a 3rd wife. And this wife, he went to his uncle Ishmael's house, who was in Arabia.
This is in the Bible.
Right? He went to his uncle Ishmael's house, and he married one of his daughters. Machalet was her name. And that name literally means disease. So he went, if you will, Esau went and formed an alliance with Ishmael. And so in forming this alliance by taking this wife, which very interestingly, that name means disease, a couple of family words means profane, and one family word related to the word Machalet is Allah, of all things. So here's my point. Way back in the beginning, because you got to understand the end by understanding the beginning.
That's right.
Esau formed an alliance with Ishmael. And so what do you have in Ezekiel 38 and 9? You've got all these nations coming together in a confederation against Israel, but what do they all have in common?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, what they have in common is this Muslim heritage, if you will.
They're all the same religion, basically.
That's what pulls them together. It's not nationalities per se, whether or not they're Libyan or Persian or what have you.
Well, I can prove that to you. What you just said is true, and I can prove it because if you go to the Middle East and you talk about the Iranians, and I don't mean this disrespectful, but the Arab-speaking people in Israel and Egypt and Jordan, they don't like the Persians. Because they are not Arabs. The Persians are not Arabs. And while the Arabs may speak Arabic, some Aramaic, the Iranians speak the Farsi language. It's a totally different language. And so what is interesting is here you have Persia, and again, I know Iranian people, and I love them. Some of them live in America, are Christians, and I even know some that are I call them extremely liberal Muslims, you know, because they'll sit and talk about Jesus and cry. But they're wonderful people, because the ones I've met are very friendly people here in the United States, and they have family back there. So I'm not saying this personally about that group of people, but I'm saying this as it relates to being in the Middle East and talking to either other Muslims or Arabs who just don't like them. But look at this. Libya is a different group. Okay? Ethiopia is there's a lot of Muslims. There's a different group. Look at Gomer. Look at Togarmah. How come they align themselves with a group that secretly they don't care about?
Because what they have in common.
Now say it again. And their commonality is the hatred toward Israel. That's right.
But going back to this alliance that Edom or Esau formed with Ishmael way back when. And so all these things that started way back here in the beginning, Perry, are coming to fruition now. You know what, let me throw something else out real quick, because I think it's important to say. I want people to understand, I know you feel this way, we're not saying that anybody who's a literal descendant of Esau is automatically consigned to the flames. We're not saying that.
No.
Because Caleb, one of the 2 that goes into the land of Israel, was a descendant of Esau.
And that people don't know that.
That's right.
So you had like a Gentile guy that had come into the household of faith.
Exactly. That's the point. In God's eyes, it really doesn't matter what nationality you are. It doesn't matter what heritage you come from. What matters to God is, do you accept His word? Do you receive His word?
Covenant.
Right.
Having a redemptive covenant.
And when you come into the covenant, you're part of His people.
That's right. In other words, when you look at someone who's a descendant of Ishmael, which would be the Gulf states predominantly, or a descendant of Esau, which would be the country of Jordan. We're simplifying this. Or you see someone who's Jewish who lives there. Or you see someone who's simply an Arab from another country. The Lord, these are the original people. These are the original descendants of the patriarchs of the Bible. And God loves them. But God also has provided a covenant of redemption. Now, what is a covenant of redemption? It is a covenant of eternal life once your life has ended on earth. And the only guaranteed redemptive